Right now, in the quietest hours of the night, your mind may be frantically scrubbing at the fabric of an old memory. You are likely replaying past conversations, analyzing the exact moment a beautiful connection began to drift away, and wondering what shade your name holds in the mind of someone who is no longer there. It is an exhausting, silent labor to try to wash the deep color out of a history that has already been dyed into your life. You treat your own heart like a garment that has been ruined by a stain, spending hours in the dark attempting to bleach away the traces of a shared past. You hope that if you only dissect the separation long enough, you can somehow return the threads to a blank, pristine state. Let the weight of the day settle quietly around you now. The room is dark, and the cool night air moves softly through the cracks in the window frame, carrying the clean scent of damp earth and distant rain. The heavy wooden beams of the floorboards beneath you hold your weight completely, asking for no effort and demanding no performance from your tired limbs. Your eyes can rest in the deep, velvety shadows that fill the corners of the space. There is a soft hiss of evening wind passing through the leaves outside, mimicking the slow rhythm of the natural world letting go of its daily heat. Your limbs feel dense against the linen sheets, yielding naturally to gravity, without any conscious guidance. The mattress supports your physical form, without asking you to resolve a single conflict before it gives you shelter. You are not a ruined piece of cloth because you still carry the deep hue of a drifted relationship. What you feel tonight is not a structural failure of your heart, but the natural resonance of an emotional color that was absorbed deeply into your fibers. Tonight we are not going to aggressively bleach your memories, or force the mind to pretend that the connection never existed. True healing does not come from tearing at the threads to erase a stain. A profound insight of Buddhist wisdom reveals that the mind does not find peace by destroying its own history. You find liberation when you stop treating the permanent shade of a past love as an enemy that must be cleansed. The exhausting struggle to force the fabric back to an empty, white state is what breaks your spirit, not the beautiful color itself. Dear friend, right now, maybe you have felt this quiet friction too, if it feels right to admit it. You lie in the dark and wonder how you are remembered, trying desperately to control a narrative that lives in another person's head. You want their mind to hold a perfect picture of you, or you long to scrub away the misunderstandings that led to the silence. But someone else's memory is a river, current you can never redirect with your bare hands. Trying to force a drifted bond back into its original shape is like attempting to rinse a fermented dye out of unspun flax using only the force of your tears. The original pain was simply the natural ending of a season, but the secondary suffering is the relentless scrubbing you perform on your own heart out of a deep fear of being permanently stained. Think of the immense energy it takes to carry a faded relationship in your thoughts every night. You examine old messages, you dissect the silent gaps between the final words, and you scold yourself for not seeing the signs of distance sooner. When the sadness of loss shows up, you do not simply allow it to rest in your chest. You immediately treat it as a defect that makes you unworthy of future peace. This continuous internal struggle creates a painful tension in your body. Your jaw tightens against the words you can no longer say. Your throat constricts around an unexpressed plea, and your chest feels tightly bound like fabric pulled too hard across a rigid loom. In a moment, this story will show us a completely different way of looking at our deep emotional stains. It will introduce us to a perspective where the permanent colors of our lives are no longer treated as ruins. But for right now, let your hands open slowly upon the bed. Notice the subtle tightness in your palms, the way your fingers curl as if they are still trying to grip the edges of a bond that has already shifted. You do not need to hold that weight tonight. The night is wide enough to contain your unspoken grief, and the quiet room is spacious enough to let the deep colors rest without requiring you to wash them clear. Let a slow, gentle breath move into your body, feeling the cool air expand the space behind your ribs. As you let the breath stream out, imagine that you are putting down a heavy wooden rinsing tool. Your arms are tired from beating the cloth against the stones, and your skin is cold from the running water. Let the tool slide completely out of your thoughts. You do not have to achieve absolute emotional clarity tonight. You do not have to fix how you are remembered, and you do not have to present a spotless heart to the darkness. Perhaps you have spent years believing that your value depends on keeping your emotional garment perfectly white and untouched by sorrow. You see others who seem to move through the world with unblemished hearts, like clean, bright fabric that has never known the depth of a dark dye. You assume that your own deep stains, your longings and your fractures are terrible proof that you are broken. You wear yourself out, trying to scrub away the indigo that life has dipped you into, forgetting that the most beautiful garments are those that have known the full depth of the vat. The ache you feel tonight does not mean you have failed your spiritual training. It simply means your heart has loved, and the color has set into the thread. You can let the dark fluid of your memories remain exactly as it is in this quiet hour. The deep shades of your separation, the unanswered questions, and the textures of your longing do not make you less worthy of tranquility. They are the authentic patterns of a heart that chose to participate in the world. Listen to the profound silence that expands between my words. That silence does not ask you to change the color of your soul tonight. The bed does not measure the purity of your history, and the night air does not demand a blank slate before it offers you rest. You are safe enough to soften the rigid defenses you have placed around your grief. Let your breath come and go like a slow wave in a quiet pool, deep, dark, and completely allowed to rest. To see how the mind becomes trapped in this exhausting cycle, we can look far beyond the familiar walls of your room, to a quiet valley hidden deep within the mist-covered mountains. The air in this valley is always cool, smelling faintly of cedar wood, wet river stones, and the sharp, clean scent of crushed fern leaves. High on a rocky terrace overlooking a rushing river stands an old timber dye house. Its walls are dark from decades of wood smoke, and its wide wooden shutters are propped open to let the damp mountain air flow freely through the workspace. Inside this workshop, the light is soft and dim, casting long, dark shadows across a stone floor. Rows of massive earthenware vats are buried deep into the ground, each one filled with a thick, fermenting fluid that ripples slightly whenever the mountain breeze enters the room. This liquid is natural indigo, a deep, living dye that changes its nature with the temperature of the air and the touch of the hand. It is a slow, patient craft that cannot be rushed by human impatience. In the center of this dye house stands Kalen. He is a young man who has traveled for many weeks from a distant town, carrying a heavy burden in his chest that makes his breathing shallow and his posture rigid. Kalen is holding a coarse hemp tunic. The garment is stained a deep, chaotic navy color, full of uneven streaks, dark patches, and jagged outlines where a liquid has soaked heavily into the threads. This tunic was a gift from a deeply cherished relationship, a connection that had once defined his entire sense of security, but has since drifted into complete silence. The person who gave it to him has gone, leaving behind only the permanent imprint of their absence. Kalen stands at the edge of the terrace, right where the stone floor meets the rushing waters of the mountain river. He is completely exhausted. His arms ache, his fingers are raw and cold from the icy water, and his eyes are wide with an anxious desperation. He is holding a heavy oak rinsing paddle, a long, flat wooden tool used by traditional dyers to stir cloth in the running current. Kalen is using the paddle to beat the hemp tunic against the flat river rocks, striking the cloth again and again, hoping that the fierce current will wash the deep blue color out of the threads. He watches the white foam of the river crash over the stained fabric. He scrubs the hemp with sand from the riverbank, driving the heavy wooden paddle down with a rhythmic, frantic force. Thud, thud. The sound echoes loudly against the stone walls of the dye house. But the indigo does not disappear. The deep blue shade seems to set into the very core of the fiber. The threads are beginning to fray. The edges are tearing, and the cloth is losing its original strength. Yet the color remains dark, permanent, and unyielding. Frustration burns like a hot coal behind Kalen's ribs. He tells himself that if he can just wash this tunic completely clean, if he can make it white and spotless again, the ache in his chest will finally stop. He believes that his peace of mind depends entirely on erasing the imprint of the person who left him. He is terrified of the shade his name holds in their memory, and he is equally terrified of the permanent blue stain that lives within his own thoughts. He does not realize that he is treating the cloth exactly the way he treats his own soul, trying to violently destroy the texture of his history to protect himself from the vulnerability of loss. He strikes the rock one more time, his muscles trembling from the continuous effort. The cold water splashes against his face, mixing with the sweat on his forehead. He is completely trapped in his own cycle of resistance, completely deaf to the quiet world around him. He does not hear the soft, deliberate sound of footsteps approaching from the darkness of the interior workshop. Master Ota steps out onto the wet stones of the terrace. He is an elderly man, the master dyer of the mountain valley, who has spent 70 years working in absolute silence with the living vats. His face is lined with deep, peaceful wrinkles, and his hands are permanently stained a dark, metallic navy color from the fingernails down to the wrists, a lifetime of color etched forever into his skin. Master Ota does not yell at the young man to stop. He does not offer an immediate lecture on the futility of his labor. He simply stands near the doorframe, leaning on a long wooden staff, watching his guest fight a hopeless war against the river. Kalen finally stops to catch his breath, his chest heaving under the weight of his exhaustion. He notices the old master standing in the shadows. The young traveler freezes, his heart sinking with a sudden wave of shame. He lowers the heavy oak rinsing paddle, looking down at the frayed, wet heap of fabric on the rock, entirely certain that the master will cast him out for ruining the cloth. But the old dyer does not speak of ruin. He walks slowly across the terrace, his straw sandals making a soft, wet brushing sound against the damp stones. He stops beside Kalen and looks down at the stained tunic. He reaches out his dark blue hand, touching the wet hemp gently, running his stained thumb over the frayed edges where the threads have begun to split apart. From the wide sleeve of his faded robe, Master Ota pulls out a small, heavy object. It is a copper fixing ring, a simple metal hoop that has been darkened by years of submersion. In the deep vats it carries no decoration, only the heavy, stable weight of unrefined metal. The master does not explain its purpose. He simply places the copper ring into Kalen's raw palms, gesturing for him to feel its cool, unmoving gravity. The old man points toward the massive earthenware tubs buried in the workshop floor, where the indigo liquid rests in absolute darkness, completely still, reflecting nothing but the black rafter beams above. He asks Kalen a simple question, his voice low and soft, like the quiet murmur of the river in a deep gorge. He asks the young man why he is trying to give the river a color that already belongs to the fiber. Kalen looks from the copper ring to the dark vats, his mind turning over the words, but the true lesson remains completely hidden behind the wall of his grief. He feels the cold metal in his hands, completely unaware of how this simple tool is about to change the way he breathes. This quiet image of the young traveler standing by the rushing mountain water is not a sign that you must harden your heart against the beauty of human connection. It is not an instruction to turn your soul into a cold, unfeeling stone that never registers the warmth of another person's presence. Buddhist wisdom does not ask you to live an empty life, or to flatten your emotions until you become entirely numb to the beautiful shifting colors of the world. The deep insight hidden within the old timber dye house points toward a much gentler, quieter understanding of the human spirit. It is a soft call to notice how we treat the natural marks that love leaves behind, especially when we are lying awake, trying to mentally force our history into a shape it can no longer take. The heavy ache that keeps your mind running late into the night does not come solely from the fact that a relationship has ended. The real suffering lives in the tight grip of the mind that refuses to let the fluids settle down into the dark. We lie down in the darkness and we pick up a heavy mental paddle, beating the memory of that connection against our own thoughts, desperate to rinse away the blue hue that has already been woven into our fibers. The primary pain is simply the fluid nature of life, which brings seasons of closeness and seasons of deep silence, moments of shared light, and moments where our paths naturally drift apart. But the secondary pain, the heavy wound we give ourselves in the dark, is the relentless demand that our fabric must remain completely spotless, empty, and white to be considered safe. Think about what happens inside your body when you try to force an old connection to fit your current expectations. When the memory of a past closeness arises, You do not simply allow the sadness to rest in your chest. You immediately treat the grief as a terrible defect, a permanent stain that proves you are broken or unwanted. You pick up the iron tools of logic, trying to dissect the exact moment the color began to change, scolding yourself for absorbing the shade so deeply. This desperate attachment to an idealized, unblemished slate is what turns our beautiful capacity for love into a form of long-term self-punishment. We turn the natural dye of our life into a battlefield, creating a painful friction between the permanent shade of our history and the rigid demands of our intellect. Mindfulness, when met within the quiet workspace of the vats, is not a forced state of concentration or a harsh suppression of your longing. It is simply the ability to sit beside the reservoir of your own mind without holding a single tool of correction. It is the gentle capacity to look at a dark streak of memory or a sharp wave of missing someone without instantly deciding that you must scrub it out to be at peace. When you cultivate this soft awareness, you look at your own heart with the patient, unhurried eyes of the old master dyer. You no longer see a ruined garment that must be bleached clean. You see a collection of deep, authentic colors that are simply waiting to find their natural resting place in the dark. Every difficult prediction you make tonight, every instance where you wonder how you are remembered, and every painful loop of what you should have said is like an unrinsed thread. It is not proof that you are failing your path, and it is not a sign that you are unworthy of tranquility. It is simply the record of a heart that dared to open its doors to another human being, allowing the deep indigo of their presence to alter the fabric of your soul. Perhaps you learned to scrub so violently because you were dropped into a world that only valued you when you were completely spotless. Perhaps you became hypervigilant about your identity because you believed that carrying a scar meant you were permanently damaged. These deep colors are not defects in your character. They are the very textures of your capacity to care, and you do not need to wash them clear to find sanctuary tonight. Let the realization settle behind your ribs that nothing in the natural world maintains a state of rigid, unchanging whiteness to survive the seasons. The autumn forests allow the deep reds and dark brown minerals to soak into the earth. The winter mountains accept the heavy blue shadows of dusk without trying to reflect the morning sun. And the massive vats hold the dye not because the clay fights the fluid, but because the container allows the deep sediment to settle quietly at the bottom. Yet we demand our inner lives to be entirely blank, perfectly unblemished, and completely free of the marks of our attachments. We treat our minds like dry pieces of linen that must never absorb a single drop of reality, forgetting that a heart grows beautiful by absorbing the full depth of the vat, not by running from the color. Letting go does not mean you abandon the love you felt, or that you force yourself to forget the name of the person who has gone. It simply means you stop turning the memory into an iron paddle that you use to strike your own spirit. You put down the heavy tool that demands an impossible erasure. You give your heart permission to hold the deep blue shade, the uneven streaks, and the quiet spaces where the color runs dark. When you release the extra struggle of trying to bleach your soul in the middle of the night, the energy you were using to fight your own history suddenly returns to your body as a calm, spacious ease. Compassion is the spaciousness that allows the deep hue to exist without needing to explain it to a spectator. It is the gentle understanding that your fabric is already complete, even if it carries the dark, unrinsed sediment of a difficult separation upon its threads. You do not have to prove your purity to the darkness by presenting a spotless mind before you are allowed to sleep. The night does not require you to be a blank slate. It only invites you to lower the garment into the quiet fluid so the colors can find their peace. Slowly, this quiet dye-house insight becomes deeply personal as the hours grow older. We begin to see that the constant overthinking we practice is actually a form of hidden grief, a plea from a heart that wants to drop its guard, but is terrified of being permanently ruined by the shade it carries. But the ancient wisdom of the Buddha reminds us that beneath all your frantic scrubbing, your essential awareness has never been diminished by the color it holds. You cannot make yourself whole by tearing at the threads of your past, and you cannot protect your heart by suffocating its ability to absorb the world. The soul is already vast enough to hold every shade. containing within its deep vats the silent, natural peace of the entire mountain valley. In a moment, this story will show us how to bring this soft, unstained awareness down into the very center of our resting body. But before we move into that gentle practice, let your mind reflect on the immense relief of being allowed to keep your history. Let the unrinsed strands of your day remain exactly where they fell on the stone floor of your memory. You do not have to scrub them tonight, and you do not have to wash them clear before tomorrow. Let yourself notice the wide, quiet reservoir that opens up when you stop trying to bleach your life. It is like the stillness that enters the workshop when the heavy wooden oars are laid on the benches, and the surface of the indigo vat becomes perfectly dark, smooth, and still. The room does not become empty, it becomes weightless. The silence is no longer a lonely void. It becomes an open space where the natural texture of your presence can finally rest in the dark. Let the cool, damp silence of the mountain valley flow gently into the space where you rest. You do not need to perform any difficult mental tasks right now. There is no requirement to master this ancient teaching before your eyes close for the night. If it feels right, let your attention slide down from the busy theater of your analytical thoughts. Descend quietly into the simple, unhurried rhythm of your physical form. You might begin by simply noticing the natural weight of your body as it sinks into the surface beneath you. The bed does not demand that you explain your history before it carries your mass. It supports you without any hidden conditions. It holds you with a silent stability that requires no effort from your tired muscles. Take a slow, quiet breath into the lower space of your chest. Let the cool air expand the area around your heart without forcing a particular pattern. As you let the air stream out, imagine that you are laying the heavy oak rinsing paddle down upon the dark stone floor. Your arms have been working for hours to scrub the memories clean. Your mind has been hitting the same hard stones of regret again and again. For tonight, the cold riverbank can be left behind. The rushing water can flow without your interference. You might allow the breath to move in and out like a gentle tide, a slow, dark fluid that carries no demands. Perhaps you can direct a soft awareness toward the small muscles around your jaw and your throat. This is the exact place where we hold the tension of unspoken words. It is where we tighten ourselves against the grief of a connection that has drifted into silence. Let the lower jaw release its tight brace. Create a tiny space of ease behind your teeth. Notice the skin across your forehead, the delicate areas around your eyes that spend the day analyzing changes in the room. See if those areas can smooth out into the deep shadows. You do not need to achieve a state of perfect relaxation to be safe here. Even noticing the presence of stiffness is a beautiful form of clarity. Now, let your awareness gently observe the landscape of your mind. You might notice one specific memory or one persistent worry that has been asking for your attention tonight. Perhaps it is the phantom shape of a past conversation that you wish had ended differently. Maybe it is the painful question of what someone else thinks when they remember your face. Do not try to aggressively push this blue thread out of your mind. Do not scold yourself for carrying a heavy heart into the dark. If we try to violently banish the memory, we are only picking up the scrubbing brush once more. Instead, allow the thought to stand naked in the room. Name its emotional color without any judgment. You might say quietly to yourself, "This is the blue shade of my longing. This is the sediment of my grief." In the quiet space of your imagination, see yourself holding the small, heavy copper fixing ring that Master Ota carried in his sleeve. Feel its cool, steady gravity against the palms of your hands. It does not move, it does not argue, and it does not try to change its shape. Now take that sharp, distressing thought, that deep anxiety about how you are remembered, and imagine binding it gently to the copper hoop. You are not trying to wash the memory away. You are not pretending that the love never existed, or that the separation did not hurt. You are simply choosing to change how the weight is held. Imagine lowering the copper ring slowly down into the massive earthenware vat of your own deeper consciousness. Let it sink through the dark, cool liquid, down past the turbulent surface of your analytical mind. Watch the copper ring carry the heavy memory all the way to the very bottom. Where the ancient sediment rests in absolute stillness, the dark fluid wraps around the memory, absorbing its sharp edges into a vast, silent depth. The intense blue lines begin to soften. The chaotic streaks dissolve into the grand indigo pool, spreading outward until the boundaries completely disappear. The color is no longer an active stain that tears at your fabric. It is simply a quiet hue that rests peacefully in the dark sanctuary of your mind. And this is where the mind begins to soften. The internal workshop grows quiet because you have stopped trying to bleach your history. You can return to the immediate presence of your breathing body whenever you are ready. The chest rises like a slow swell in a dark harbor, and it falls like a wave returning its moisture to the sea. Every inhalation brings a cool, clean space into your heart. Every exhalation is a quiet permission to let the unrinsed threads rest without your constant supervision. You do not have to achieve absolute emotional closure before you allow your eyes to close completely. The healing we seek does not require a spotless garment. It happens when we realize that the fabric is already whole, regardless of the shade it holds. The night is large enough to hold your unwashed grief, and the quiet shadows are spacious enough to let your heart rest without requiring a blank slate. Let the heavy thoughts settle into the cool depths, knowing that the dye has set, and the fiber requires no further bleaching to find its peace. You are safe enough to let the world turn without your calculations tonight. As the body becomes heavier and the thoughts become more spacious, we begin to approach a different kind of understanding. The dark liquid in the vats remains perfectly still, holding the copper rings in the deep sediment where the noise of the river cannot reach. But the deeper transformation had not yet revealed itself to the young traveler in the valley. There was still a second lesson hiding in the ancient workshop, a truth that would change the way Kalen understood the relationship between his hidden wounds and his ultimate endurance. The autumn seasons arrived and left the mountain valley, burying the old workshop under heavy white snowdrifts before the mountain streams thawed once more. 12 years had passed since the night the young traveler, Kalen, had sat by the edge of the terrace, holding the cool copper fixing ring and watching the dark indigo fluid rest in absolute stillness. Kalen had remained in the valley, choosing to live in a small stone cottage near the lower wetlands where the wild indigo plants grew. He had learned the basic art of working with the dye, yet the deep human habit of overbuilding emotional defenses does not vanish by magic. The internal blueprint simply shifts its shape, hiding inside our desire to build a perfect spiritual life or a life completely free from unexpected change. Kalen had spent these years trying to maintain an absolute internal balance, believing that if he could just structure his thoughts correctly, he would never have to face the terrifying feeling of sinking. Following the peaceful passing of the old master weaver, a new challenge arrived in the valley. A wealthy merchant from the capital arrived at the workshop, carrying a magnificent garment of raw, hand-woven silk. The merchant demanded that this garment be dyed a uniform, flawless shade of midnight blue. He made it clear that if there was a single streak, a single drop of uneven sediment, or a single variation in the hue, he would refuse to pay the workshop and would ensure no other travelers ever visited the valley. Kalen felt the ancient, familiar anxiety tightening its grip around his throat. He told himself that because this project was meant to protect the very survival of the valley, it had to be completely flawless, unyielding, and absolutely unshakable. He spent 5 straight days preparing the massive earthenware vat, selecting only the purest water from the high mountain springs. He drove his tools into the fermenting sediment with immense force, stirring the dark fluid until his shoulders burned with exhaustion. He bound the corners of the silk garment with double-twisted hemp cords, pulling each knot until his palms bled. He was terrified that the fabric would absorb the dye unevenly, seeing the natural variations of the silk as a terrible weakness. He worked until his eyes were bloodshot and his spine felt like a rusted iron rod. To secure this massive project against the unpredictable temperature of the changing season, Kalen decided to use the copper fixing ring. He bound the silk garment tightly to the heavy hoop, intending to lower it into the deepest part of the vat where the fluid was most concentrated. He was certain that this rigid arrangement would force the fabric to take the color exactly as he had planned. He believed that if a single corner of the cloth dipped or tilted unevenly, it would mean his years of practice had been a complete illusion. On the sixth night, a sudden violent autumn deluge rushed down from the high rocky peaks. The temperature in the workshop dropped instantly, causing the living fluid in the vats to churn and bubble unexpectedly. Kalen stood over the earthenware tub, drenched by the cold mist coming through the open shutters, holding a small paper lantern in his trembling hand. As he lowered the rigid copper hoop into the dark fluid, a terrible thing began to happen. Because the silk was bound so tightly to the metal ring, it had no internal flexibility. The sudden change in temperature caused the dye to curdle along the tight seams, creating dark, jagged streaks across the delicate fabric. The short, stiff ropes holding the silk began to strain. The enormous pressure of the curdled dye twisted the rigid corners of the cloth, causing the delicate silk threads to split and fray under their own unyielding weight. Kalen felt a wave of absolute horror and self-judgment wash through his chest. He saw the ruined fabric and immediately believed he had failed everyone. His mind screamed that he had not built the defense thick enough, that he had missed a flaw, that he was inherently incapable of protecting what mattered. He raised his heavy oak rinsing paddle, ready to plunge into the dark tub to force the breaking ropes back together, to fight the fluid with his bare hands. But as his fingers touched the cold rim of the vat, he stopped. He looked at the bubbling foam of the curdled dye, and then he looked down at his own stained knuckles. He remembered the silent wisdom of the old master, who had taught him that the water is not an enemy to be conquered, but a depth to be held. He realized that his frantic desire for total control was the exact thing that was tearing his creation apart. The changing temperature was not the source of the destruction. The destruction was born from the rigidity of his own design. Kalen performed one small, quiet act of radical transformation. He did not throw down his tools in anger, and he did not rush blindly into a frantic effort to bleach the silk. Instead, he took a slow, deep breath, letting the cool evening air steady his lungs. He knelt directly on the damp stones at the edge of the rising tide of his own panic. With steady, deliberate fingers, he did not try to tighten the breaking ropes. He reached down into the dark fluid and completely untied the remaining rigid cords that held the fractured garment to the copper hoop. He allowed the tightly packed center of the fabric to loosen. As the suffocating pressure of the knots disappeared, the silk garment underwent a subtle, beautiful change. The individual threads expanded, opening up wide channels between the weave. The churning dye, instead of slamming against a solid wall of fabric, began to flow harmlessly through the open spaces of the loosened structure. The silk stopped fighting the fluid. It dipped softly into the sediment, rose with the gentle ripples, and began to float with an organic, flexible buoyancy. It stayed secured to the copper ring not because it was chained tightly, but because it had allowed the dark indigo to become part of its internal space. It was riding the change rather than resisting reality. Kalen sat in the dim workshop for the rest of the night, his hands resting loosely on his knees. He allowed the uncertainty of the curdled vat to exist around him, without demanding an immediate guarantee of perfection. He allowed his own feelings of fear and fatigue to wash through his mind without trying to bind them into a defensive calculation. He realized that the transformation he needed was not a magical life free of sudden storms, but the willingness to let his inner space become porous. He stopped treating his anxious thoughts as absolute truths that required an immediate wall, choosing instead to let them pass through his awareness like the dark indigo moving between the loosened threads. When the pale light of morning broke over the mountain ridge, the merchant returned to the workshop, expecting to find his garment ruined. Kalen pulled the silk slowly out of the deep vat. The garment was not perfectly uniform. It carried a deep, swirling pattern of midnight blue, full of soft transitions and organic depth that looked like the night sky shifting over the lake. It was slightly asymmetrical. It had lost its perfect, original plainness, and its edges were dark with the memory of the storm. Yet, it was breathtakingly beautiful, possessing a rich, stable character that could never be achieved by a rigid technique. The merchant stood in absolute silence, marveling at a piece of art that had survived precisely because the weaver had known how to loosen his grip. Kalen stood by the window, his body cold but his heart filled with a quiet, unshakable lightness. The transformation within him did not mean his fear of failure had vanished forever. or that he had become a perfect, unbothered sage. It was a subtle, profound shift in how he related to his own internal weather. He saw that peace was not a solid monument built to withstand a siege. Peace was the ability to loosen the knots when the tide rises, allowing the mind to float on the exact depth of the present moment. Now let this ancient river wisdom come closer to your own life, moving silently into the quiet room where you are resting. The transformation we seek is never about preventing the storms of life from touching our shores. It is about learning how to stop feeding the rigid structures that turn our natural vulnerability into an exhausting struggle. But the psychological mechanism of this endless self-protection runs very deep within our modern daily habits, and to truly release its grip, we must examine the hidden ways the mind creates its own heaviness. To look down into the deeper currents of your own late-night restlessness is to discover a hidden mechanism that operates beneath your conscious awareness. We often tell ourselves that we are awake because the external problems of our lives are simply too heavy to be left alone. We believe that if we rerun our mistakes one more time, or if we map out every turn of tomorrow's path, we will finally arrive at a state of total security. But if you observe the mind gently in this darkness, you will find a more subtle struggle taking place. The mind is attempting to use the sharp tool of self-judgment to fashion an unbreakable shield against the natural fluid movements of the world. We look at our doubts, our exhaustion, and our grief, and we treat them as terrifying leaks in our vessel that must be violently plugged with certainty before we can permit ourselves to rest. This internal momentum is fueled by a profound fear of uncertainty. We want the river of our lives to remain entirely predictable, flat, and perfectly matched to our mental blueprints. When an unexpected change occurs, or when our own emotional reactions stray from our ideal image of strength, a quiet panic takes over the body. We begin to replay old conversations like someone trying to rearrange stones that have already dropped to the bottom of the stream. We check the future over and over, rehearsing our responses, hoping that if we pack our thoughts tightly enough, we can freeze the water in place. This continuous effort to maintain absolute control creates a profound division within the heart. We turn our natural human sensitivities into a rigid identity, labeling ourselves as fundamentally inadequate simply because we are currently feeling the heavy pull of a changing tide. Buddhist wisdom offers a beautiful, clear lens that can completely dissolve this exhaustion. One of the great insights of the Buddha was the distinction between the original weight that life presents to us and the secondary heaviness that the mind manufactures through resistance. Consider the difference between the deep water itself and the suffocating pressure of trying to squeeze the river into a box. The first kind of pain is the organic reality of being alive in a shifting universe. It is the sudden storm, the loss of an important connection, the physical tiredness of a long day, or the presence of a genuine limitation. This is simply the dampness of the marshlands, the natural environment our spirit must navigate. We cannot always prevent the clouds from breaking above us, nor can we stop the current from swelling when the high mountain snows melt. This initial weight is not a mistake. It is simply the life we are given to meet. The true suffering, the heavy burden that keeps your eyes wide in the dark, is entirely born from the second kind of pain. This is the extra weight the mind creates through control, denial, and self-punishment. It is the decision to treat the natural dampness of the river as a personal failure. When you tell yourself that you should not be feeling afraid, that you must never show vulnerability to those around you, or that your entire journey is ruined because a single plan fractured, you are driving a sharp wedge into an already tender heart. The primary water is just a natural event, but the secondary drowning is the exhausting structure of predictions we weave with our own hands out of shame. True peace does not arrive because you have successfully engineered a river that never flows or changes. Freedom comes when you change your fundamental relationship with the movement that is already taking place. Imagine a vast field of tall, unspun marsh reeds growing quietly in the shallow waters of a silent lake at midnight. The individual stalks do not spend their hours fighting the dark mud that feeds their roots, nor do they look at their own slender, flexible bodies and wish they were built of solid granite blocks. When a heavy autumn rain falls from the sky, The reeds do not try to remain perfectly dry, and they do not try to freeze themselves into an immovable posture to resist the weight of the water. They allow the rain to slide down their green skin, absorbing the moisture directly into their fibers, bowing down flat against the surface of the lake when the heavy gusts blow. They trust the space within their own hollow stems to bring them back upright when the storm has passed through the valley. The marsh survives the flood not because it is hard like a mountain wall, but because it has entirely surrendered its form to the fluid nature of the climate it occupies. When you lie awake trying to resolve your entire future in one night, you are treating your mind like a vessel that must be carried on your shoulders to stay safe. You assume that your anxious thoughts are permanent truths about your identity, rather than temporary waves passing through your open awareness. You begin to confuse the passing storm with the sky that holds it. Every drop of fear that touches your heart is treated as an emergency that requires immediate binding, an urgent signal to pull the hemp ropes tighter around your soul. This continuous defensive reaction is what keeps your breath shallow and your limbs rigid on the bed, preventing your consciousness from settling into the natural buoyancy of deep sleep. What happens if you choose to stop treating every fearful thought as a command that must be obeyed? What if the heaviness you feel tonight is not proof that you are failing your path, but simply a sign that your life is currently moving through a deep channel of change? You can allow the current of this moment to flow precisely where it must, without trying to jam extra certainties into the gaps of your knowledge. You can look at your own confusion with the silent compassion of the old weaver, recognizing that the loose, unspun threads of your current struggle are the very elements that keep you flexible enough to ride the waves. This profound shift in perspective is what allows the spirit to soften its ancient defenses. You begin to see that you do not need to hate yourself for being weary, and you do not need to apologize for the textures that make you human. Your essential awareness is already light, spacious, and completely supported by the ground beneath you, far beneath the superficial cracks in your armor. When you stop feeding the secondary fire of judgment, the original pain becomes something you can easily sit with, letting it rest in the quiet depth of your presence. Slowly, the river insight begins to move out of the realm of mountain parables and step into the immediate reality of your tomorrow morning. We begin to see how this gentle surrender applies to the small, noisy moments of our daily routine, transforming the way we walk through the world. But the integration of this wisdom into modern life requires us to look directly at the exact places where we lose our footing during the day, where the temptation to rebuild the rigid raft is strongest. Now let this ancient mountain wisdom step directly into the noisy landscape of your modern everyday routine. It is often simple to feel the quiet beauty of acceptance when the room is dark and the house is perfectly still. But the true test of the dyed garment happens tomorrow morning. When the daylight arrives, you will be met by 1,000 small demands to return to the anxious workshop of your mind. The modern world functions like a crowded marketplace filled with people displaying perfectly bleached, spotless linen. It constantly tempts you to measure your internal life against an impossible standard of uniform clarity. You will feel a sudden pressure to hide the deep streaks of your history. You will try to weave a perfectly uniform exterior so that no one can see the vulnerable spaces where the indigo has run dark. Think of how this exhausting self-protection shows up in the smallest fragments of your ordinary day. Perhaps you find yourself checking your small, glowing screen for a message that has not arrived. You feel a rising tightness in your chest because the silence feels like a judgment against your value. In that quiet window of waiting, your mind automatically grabs its old rinsing paddle. You begin to beat the silence against your own thoughts, trying to force the situation to make sense. Or maybe you spend your afternoon replaying a small mistake you made during a casual conversation. You pull the heavy cords of self-reproach tighter around your neck, scolding yourself for not being perfectly smooth and unblemished. You watch other people move through their days with apparent ease. You assume their hearts are completely clear, and you conclude that you are hopelessly ruined because your own path carries the deep stains of loss. You wear a polite smile while carrying an immense weight behind your ribs, terrified that if your hidden vulnerabilities are exposed, you will be cast aside by the current. You might even feel a sharp wave of guilt whenever you try to lie down and rest, believing that you are only allowed to stop scrubbing if you have successfully eliminated every single doubt from your life. This is the modern habit of treating your own heart like a dirty garment that must be violently cleansed before it is worthy of being seen. And perhaps this is where the deep wisdom of the mountain workshop begins to touch your own heart. Living with a porous mind means choosing an entirely different way of walking through these daily pressures. Tomorrow, when an unpredictable event threatens to disrupt your comfort, you can allow yourself to pause before you offer a forced reaction. That single moment of quiet breathing is the exact equivalent of letting the heavy copper ring sink to the bottom of the vat. You are choosing not to pull the knots tighter. You can notice the cold surge of panic or the heat of irritation, naming its texture without instantly deciding that you must wash it away. You are simply letting the indigo fluid pass through the open spaces of your awareness, trusting that your fabric can handle the color without tearing apart. You can begin to care deeply about your daily work and your relationships without gripping the outcome so tightly that your body grows rigid. When you release the impossible demand for an absolute guarantee of how you are perceived, you give the fluid world permission to show its true nature. You can speak your thoughts clearly, make your ordinary mistakes openly, and let the dark streaks of your daily errors exist without feeling that your fundamental value has been reduced. You do not have to earn your right to find rest by presenting a spotless mind to the universe, because the deep vat supports the stained silk just as fully as it holds the plainest thread. Think of how much life will return to your spirit when you stop treating your own thoughts as absolute commands. When the internal voice starts whispering that you are not enough, you do not have to obey its rigid blueprint. You can look at that prediction as a single drop of ink falling into a vast, clear reservoir, an event that colors the water for a moment, but leaves the depth entirely safe. You can sit comfortably with the uncertainty of your future, allowing the surface of your life to show its authentic textures, knowing that a flexible garment is far more resilient than a brittle front. As you prepare to leave the noise of the day behind, let this practical softness settle into the very center of your bones. The modern world will continue to demand iron safety, but your soul is built to ride the natural currents of its own organic journey. You can allow yourself to be exactly who you are in this moment, a collection of deep human fibers that has survived the heavy waters and is fully capable of resting without fear. Slowly, the frantic momentum of the daylight begins to recede, and the absolute stillness of the night returns to claim the room. The practical applications of the day dissolve into the soft shadows, leaving only the slow, rhythmic movement of your breathing form. But there is still one final layer of weightlessness waiting for you in the deep heart of your consciousness, a place where all effort ceases entirely, and the traveler returns to the ancient source. The deep indigo reservoir of the mountain valley has completely surrendered its motion to the absolute silence of the midnight hours. Out in the cool dark of the workshop, the fermentation has ceased its slow bubbling, and the surface of the great earthenware tubs rests like a sheet of black glass reflecting no light. The thick smell of aged cedar wood, cold river silt, and wet stone has settled into the very floorboards, absorbing the frantic momentum of the long summer journey. The copper fixing ring lies resting in the thick, unmoving sediment at the absolute bottom of the vat, holding the fabric in place without any further need for human supervision. There are no more text messages to wait for, no more broken relationships to fix in the dark, and no more versions of your own history to clean before the sun rises. The heavy oak rinsing paddle has been leaned against the far corner of the timber wall, completely retired from its long, bruising labor against the stones. Let the physical form of your limbs sink down with total density into the support of the mattress below you. You can feel the quiet, unyielding gravity of the room, an ancient presence that invites your muscles to entirely abandon their long daily watch. Your shoulder blades can widen into the cotton fabric, releasing the rigid posture that tried so desperately to protect you from the judgments of the marketplace. The bed bears your weight completely without requiring a single explanation of your past, demanding no absolute assurances and asking for no spotless ledger before it grants you complete shelter. You do not have to stand as a monument of strength. Tonight you do not have to force a polite smile into the dark, and you do not have to maintain a flawless front for the world. The platform beneath you is perfectly stable, carrying your entire mass just as the ancient earth holds the heavy foundations of the mountainside dye house. Your breathing has found its own natural, slow frequency, flowing in and out of your body without any guidance from your conscious mind. The air moves across your lips like a cool evening breeze coming through the open shutters of the terrace, and it leaves your lungs like water returning quietly to the deep pool of a silent river. With every slow exhalation, imagine the remaining worries of your relationship history dissolving like loose particles of ink in a vast expanse of clear fluid. Let the memory of the cold distances, the unreturned loyalty, and the internal conversations you wish you could rewrite slide completely out of your grip. You do not have to organize those loose threads tonight. You do not have to defend your character to the dark, and you do not have to prove your readiness to the silence. The uneven shades of your life can remain exactly as they are, floating peacefully in the deep water, without requiring a single touch from your hands. Notice the profound weightlessness that enters the chest when the mind stops treating its own history as a stain. Your grief is no longer an active defect that renders your heart ruined or incomplete. It is simply a rich, beautiful color that has been woven into your unique fiber, a permanent testimony to a soul that chose to care deeply about another human being. When a sudden wave of longing or a sharp memory visits your awareness in this quiet hour, you do not have to pick up a mental tool to force it away. You can let the dark fluid rest in the center of your heart, knowing that the spacious awareness within you is large enough to contain the color without being destroyed by its shade. The garment of your presence remains beautiful, not because it has never known the vat, but because it has fully absorbed the depth of the dye and has finally allowed the water to become still. In this deep restfulness, your inner peace no longer depends on your ability to fix the mind of another person. You are like the heavy copper hoop resting in the dark silt of the vat, completely untouched by the cold mountain rain that falls outside the timber shutters. The metal ring does not try to alter its nature. It does not argue with the fluid that surrounds it, and it does not try to wash its surface clean. It simply yields its form to the dark sediment, becoming heavier, more stable, and more deeply quiet with every hour that passes through the valley. You do not have to actively force yourself to let go tonight. The deep, non-possessive space of your true nature is already holding you, operating quietly beneath the superficial noise of your thoughts, providing an unshakable anchor that demands no labor from your tired heart. Let the slow cadence of my voice act like the rhythmic dripping of cool water from the drying lines, relaxing the last hidden corners of your physical frame. The sharp outlines of your bedroom are slowly fading away, turning into the vast, transparent dark of a quiet mountain lake at midnight. You are floating effortlessly now, completely released from the heavy strings of your daily expectations. The vast reservoir beneath you is large enough to hold all your vulnerabilities, and it knows exactly how to keep you buoyant without a single calculation from your intellect. You can let the rinsing paddle drop into the mud. You can let the cords hang loose in the water, and you can allow yourself to sink into the deep, natural peace of pure being. You have permission to stop solving the mystery of your life for tonight. The misunderstandings that felt so heavy during the hours of light can rest quietly on the stone terrace, completely unbothered by your thoughts. The people who left you, the things you lost, and the moments you wish you could erase are all safely held within the vast architecture of the universe, requiring none of your late-night analysis to find their proper place. The darkness is vast enough to protect your unresolved grief, and the morning will find its way to the valley exactly when the night has finished its deep, restorative work. Your only duty in this stillness is to yield your weight to the ancient buoyancy that has been waiting for your return since the very beginning of the season. Feel your eyelids growing immensely heavy, drawn down by the quiet, natural gravity of absolute emotional safety. The midnight sky carries no memories it asks you to polish. It only offers a wide, velvet container where the weary traveler can finally lay down the garment and rest. Let the silent, unstained dark fill the space between your ribs, allowing the sharp images of the past to soften into the quiet mist of the mountains. You have returned to the ancient home of your own awareness, where no judgment can touch your name and no fear can disrupt your sanctuary. You are whole, you are flexible, and you are completely allowed to sink into the vast, silent peace of the deep water. And if the person you have been trying so desperately to erase from your heart was actually the very guide who taught your soul how to find its true depth within the dark, let the deep silence of this midnight valley absorb the remaining questions of your heart. You can feel the vast weightlessness expanding within your chest. A quiet openness that requires no defense, no calculation, and no permanent boundary to protect its essence. The long, exhausting labor of trying to bleach the history out of your fabric has come to a total end. The old timber workshop is completely dark, and the night air moving across your skin carries the deep, cooling peace of a river that has finished its turbulent rush through the mountain rocks. You are no longer required to carry the heavy wood of your analytical mind, and you are no longer asked to mend every broken thread before you are permitted to find sanctuary. The garment of your presence rests peacefully in the dark pool, entirely supported by the depth below, carrying its unique indigo streaks not as a record of failure, but as a beautiful, authentic testimony to a soul that chose to participate fully in the world. Think of how much internal space opens up when you finally allow the unrinsed layers of your life to exist without your constant supervision. You do not have to fix how your name is held in the thoughts of someone who has gone. You do not have to wash away the quiet misunderstandings that mark the end of an old season. And you do not have to present a spotless, unblemished heart to the darkness to be worthy of tranquility. The ancient wisdom of the Buddha reminds us that true liberation does not arrive when the past is magically erased, but when we stop using the memory of the past as a weapon against our own healing. The deep blue color that you carry tonight is not an enemy that must be cleansed by force. It is simply the natural resonance of a heart that dared to love, a permanent shade that has found its quiet alignment with the fiber. You are already whole, just as you are, resting deeply within the vast, porous stillness of this breathing body. Let the slow, rhythmic rising of your chest be your only anchor in this dark harbor. The breath comes in like a quiet wind moving through the cedar branches, and it goes out like a wave returning its moisture to the dark lake. You do not need to manage its depth, you do not need to check its purity, and you do not have to use it to achieve a state of forced relaxation. You can simply allow the natural intelligence of your form to breathe itself, yielding fully to the steady support of the mattress beneath you. The bed does not judge the quality of your history, the night does not count the number of your mistakes, and the room does not require a blank slate before it offers you a safe harbor from the storm. You are completely safe to drop the armor, to open the tight fists of your thoughts, and to let your consciousness sink into the velvety shadows that fill the corners of the space. As the hours grow older, the distinctions between your inner world and the quiet landscape outside begin to dissolve completely. The mind becomes like the massive earthenware vats buried in the stone floor, perfectly dark, perfectly still, and entirely unbothered by the movement of the clouds above. The memories that kept your eyes wide during the daylight have settled down into the deep sediment at the very bottom, held securely by the cool gravity of a non-possessive awareness. They no longer carry the power to tear at your threads, because you have untied the tight cords of shame that bound them to your identity. You are letting the fluid of your life rest as the season has left it, asymmetrical, streaked with dark blue patterns, and filled with an organic beauty that can never be ruined by the passage of time. Allow your eyes to close completely now, letting the heavy curtains of sleep fall over the workshop of your mind. The work is finished for tonight. The tools have been laid on the benches, and the fire has died down to a soft, silent ash. You do not have to solve a single mystery of your tomorrow before your consciousness drifts away into the great, uncarved quiet of the deep stream. The morning will bring its own light exactly when the darkness has completed its restorative work. and the world will continue to turn without the assistance of your worries. Trust the deep, ancient buoyancy that has carried your spirit through every flood, knowing that you are light enough to float, even when the indigo runs deep. Sinking lower now, into the warm, protective sanctuary of the absolute dark, where the traveler finally returns home to the silence that never left.